So when we did this analysis of the 20 years of scholarship in self-study that we were looking at, we identified 8 self-study characteristics. And of course, these are not on their own unique to self-study. You will find many of these characteristics, for example, in educational action research and in other movements and methodologies. But what we felt is that these 8 characteristics together make up what is unique and distinctive about self-study, which is a process of change that begins from the inside out. It starts with the self of the researcher and the practitioner. It starts by a questioning of one's own practice. Not necessarily looking at a problem, it can be looking at something that is in fact working well, but it's wanting to question, to understand more about what it is that one is doing. But something that makes self-study unique, and it's found in the name of self-study, is the focus on the self of the researcher in the practice context, and that's really, really important. So who I am as a person, as a researcher, where I come from, what values I hold, what it is that I'm really passionate about doing, all of that is really important in self-study. But what is also important and not so obvious from the name is that self-study is enabled through interaction and community. So the self in self-study is not an isolated self. It is a self that works in collaboration, in dialogue with other people. Also, something that has been there since the beginning of the self-study movement, but perhaps is not always that obvious, is that self-study fosters methodological variety and inventiveness. Because we are looking for ways to change what we do, self-study encourages us to think about different ways, not just of doing education, but also doing research. And it is multidimensional. So self-study researchers tend to use multiple methods, combine them in new ways, design novel ways of doing research, but also it brings in multi-dimensions because of the people who are involved. Many voices, many stories, many perspectives are necessary to self-study. And one of the important dimensions of self-study is that it is guided by theory, and there is no set theory for self-study. Each person will bring in theory that is valuable for them, that helps them understand what they're doing, that helps them see what they're doing differently. But it also shapes theory, and again, that is something that I think is really important in your educational action research network, is the idea of shaping theory in order to move forward with our practice. And finally, I think in line with what we heard this morning about the ethics statement of NEARI, in self-study, quality and trustworthiness are ethical responsibilities. So these are not just procedural issues in research. For self-study research, because it is about ourselves, our practice, and it is done in community and through interaction, it is an ethical responsibility to always think about what is the impact of this research on the people around me, on the people I'm working with, the people who might be indirectly impacted by what I'm doing. So these 8 self-study characteristics are what we identified as currently a characteristic of self-study working together. We wouldn't take one of them and say, well, that is self-study. We see this as a whole, but we also see these as open to change and development, and that these characteristics will grow as people engage with them over time. So from from those characteristics, if we look at them as a whole, what we come back to is the idea that self-study is self-focused. It emphasizes personal and professional self-reflection to promote change from the inside out, which changes practice, and it happens through community interaction. It's supported by a network of educators and practitioners, professionals, exchanging feedback, sharing insights, and working together. Something that I'm really passionate about as an arts-based researcher is the methodological richness of self-study. So there's no set method for self-study. Usually people use a combination of qualitative methods, although people have been known to use quantitative methods as well. And the variety is really infinite. There is, as long as what you're doing enables your inquiry and it is responsive to your particular context and what it is you're trying to do, there is no limit to the methodological inventiveness of self-study. And what is really important is that one of the quality standards of self-study is that we need to show evidence of how we have changed as practitioners and also the impact of what we're doing on our practice. But beyond just our immediate practice, how can what we're doing impact equity and social justice and social cohesion? So the changes we're talking about in self-study are not technical changes. We want to improve our practice, obviously to offer a better educational experience, but more than that, we want to improve our practice to make a change on a deeper level and a more far-reaching level in line with the values that we hold. So self-study is generative. It generates change and growth and development, and it's also responsive to the contexts that we're in, to the people that we're working with. And in order to do that, it has to engage with varied perspectives and feedback, challenge norms, and inspire shifts in how we think about and how we do education. Could I have the next slide, please? So this is another one of the found poems from 2016, from our conversation across continents between the USA and South Africa, and this one was called The Collaborative and the Self. Build a bridge, open the door, create the space, be in community. Complexity, many voices, critical friends, collective energy. Recognize value, witness growth. Pay attention to dynamics. Navigate power relationships. Forging a language, new perspectives, a learning ground, interdisciplinarity, and transdisciplinarity. Fun, passion, care, love, the gospel of life. So one of the ways in which self-study has been very interactive and collaborative is through the biannual Castle Conference. And I was talking earlier with some colleagues from Ireland who attended the last Castle Conference where I was and who experienced the dialogue and the rich conversations that take place there. And the Castle Conference has been happening since 1996, I believe, so 30 years. And that has really been instrumental to the development of the self-study movement. Internationally. It's an international conference. And one of the things that's so wonderful about it is that the conference proceedings are available online, and I'll give you the link a bit later. Going back 30 years, they're open access, they are peer-reviewed, it's a really high standard of scholarship, and those proceedings have really enriched the scholarship and practice of the self-study community over the years. So my colleagues, Makie and Ntokozo and I, were really interested, once we had identified these 8 characteristics of self-study, we were very interested to go back to the Castle Conference archives and say, okay, so where do we see exemplars of self-study initiating this inside-out educational change? And so we looked back right to 1996, and we wanted to pick out some examples that reflected a diversity of perspectives, methodologies, contexts, going back over the last 30 years to see how self-study researchers have actually been enacting this inside-out educational change.